Hello everyone, this is Ruslan from QA Meta Software, and I'm happy to welcome you all at yet another QA Meta Live virtual meetup. And today we're gonna chat with Alfonso Vasquez, who is also known as Fonsi. I guess I will call you like this during the meetup. Okay, so hi Fonsi.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, and Fonsi, as an experienced software developer in test, he has a deep understanding of software development methodologies, software development lifecycle, and DevOps, and we're going to discuss all that today from the point of view of testing mostly. And he's also proficient in TypeScript and C#, so he also writes stuff in his blog. And here he is, Fonsi, and I will start with a basic question, I guess, while people are just still coming. Just tell us a little bit about who you are, what are you doing now, like in terms of professional occupation, and how QA works in your teams and in your life.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start from the start, I guess. Um, I graduated from Augsburg College in Minneapolis with a computer science degree. Ever since the start, I started doing QA. I never really went into like deep development or anything. I was a little bit more interested in like actually automation and all that, like automata theory and all that. So I was just really attracted to like trying to automate everything. And like one of my favorite things to say is I want to automate myself out of a job, which I've gotten pretty close, but never actually got in there to that point. So over the years, I've gained, a few different roles. Most of them I've been recruited into. And currently I'm at Sherlink as the senior engineer, QA engineer. And I have a few more junior engineers that I'm sort of teaching the ropes as to how to do automation. And it's in growth mode right now. So we're just starting off with some tests, and the next phase is how do we automate, like 1,000, 2,000 tests, and how do we release, 5, 6, 7, 10 times a day, and to go into like true CI/CD mode. Similar to my past role, sort of taking this small company from a very startup mentality where there's no test or anything, releasing every 2 weeks, to going into full blown speed. That's what I'm up to.
Okay, so actually, there is one more question for me to ask. You just said that you came to QA like aiming for QA, but I believe that's not a typical path, because most of the people coming to tech or to information technology, they are aiming to go for deep development, and usually like deep development of some platform stuff. Like, so it would be totally hardcore and deep engineering. So, but I am really interested in hearing the story of a person who wants to be a QA, because I guess this idea needs more voice in our industry. So what made you want to be a QA engineer?
Yeah, so ever since I was little, I've been fascinated by like automation, right? I used to like robots and all that, and cowboys, of course. But I've always liked robots. I've always wanted it to like, make robots and all that. And as soon as I sort of started the computer science career and heard like the theory of automation, automata theory, whatever you want to call it, it sort of fascinated me that humans have been trying to automate things since the beginning of time, right? And it started back in the 1700s with like weird looking puppets that would move themselves or sign their name or play chess or something, right? And we just sort of took it that next level. And at the end of the day, what QA does is not that different from developers. Like if you're really trying to get into code, you can get into code, right? You're just sort of maintaining a different application that the business needs. And you can use all the same code tech from like TypeScript to C# to whatever language you decide. As long as you get really good at one or two and you sort of know your stuff, you can code basically all day as well, which I know is the reason that a lot of people try to aim into the dev world. You can use any type of library to like, I know a lot of people right now are interested in like the AI stuff. You can use AI for QA as well.
Yeah, so I believe we can actually switch the like interview flow, because as far as we started talking about automation and AI, there is actually a great topic to discuss for a couple of minutes, I believe. So the AI actually quite hyped this year with ChatGPT and GPT-3 models and also Midjourney, and everyone is bragging about the AI is going to take our job, and and that's funny stuff because everyone like 50 years ago, people were sure that robots will take all these hard jobs and people will stay creative, making paintings and music and so on. But now what we do actually see, the AI is really successful building awesome images. It actually is capable of writing stuff, for example, like a content writing or an simple plots for science fiction or non-science fiction and so on. So, and at this point, it's the first question which bothers everyone is, will AI take, and considering we are talking about QA, the testers' jobs? What do you think about that?
Yes, in my opinion, I don't think so, at least not yet, right? I think we're really far away from actually like AI taking from anything, right? That's my personal opinion. It really depends as to where in the curve we are of like that AI model, but I don't think we're that far up in the curve. I think that it will definitely enhance the way that developers and QA do their daily workflow. Like for example, I use ChatGPT almost every day. One of the things that I sort of like doing is, because I'm terrible at writing comments on my code, is I just sort of feed it in and tell it, can you put comments on this? And it'll just spit it back out. Sort of the other like AI assisted thing that I use is Copilot from GitHub, right? And it's basically a IntelliSense on steroids. Sometimes I can just tab 4 or 5 times and I have a test case built because it's just grabbing everything else from the project, and there we go. But it didn't just do that, right? Like you still have to write code for it to look at all your other code and sort of like figure out what you're trying to do. And it still gets things wrong, and you still have to go in there and look at what it got wrong and debug through it and all that. So yeah, I don't think we're there yet. There is a few other things out there that are a little bit more complex than ChatGPT. Like I was just reading that Evil Master, actually, it's a tool to do basically automated API test generation. So you give it your OpenAI or OpenAPI documentation, and it'll go look at them and it'll start generating test cases for it through fuzzy testing. And if you actually inject it into your code into more like a white box mode, it'll actually start grabbing metrics and everything as things run. There's a lot of interest in that recently. I think the ECR, the European Research Center, just gave them like 2 million euros or something like that to continue research. And that's just because there's a shortage of QA. Like there really is, right? People aim for like that developer field, but if you're like a good QA person, there's so many open roles for that.
Yeah, so I believe that I actually think the same as you, and we actually discussed that yesterday. But still, I believe the whole point of not being afraid of what AI does is the lack of understanding. So we actually discussed that yesterday, and the point is, people don't actually know what understanding in our heads is. So that means that we cannot actually easily recreate the process of understanding. And that's actually what you've mentioned, speaking of ChatGPT, because you can create a prompt which would generate some tests for even an API. So just give the AI an API and it will generate some tests. Then you just review them. And then you, for example, ask the ChatGPT to add Allure annotations to the code. So you would get these fancy Allure reports and so on. But in the end, it will just be following some kind of mechanical logic and not creative logic. And that's where all our conversations, like from QA Meta Software, as we are advocating for full automation. So there is also a person who raises the hand. And speaking of that, if you are listening to us, if you want to join the discussion, just raise your hand with the Zoom functionality. Just click a button and I will let you join in with your voice and camera, depending on what you want. And so all I wanted to say that when we are speaking of automation, there is also a person who says you will never automate 100% of testing. but it's not the point. So we don't want to automate exploratory testing because it requires specific QA expertise, and even a junior QA engineer cannot do quality exploration testing because you have to understand how the system works, how the test design works, where the corner cases are, and what are the unusual customer paths go. So, and this is where I believe, like, if you are trying to be positive thinking, I will think of what should I be able to do so that ChatGPT would become my ally and not a threat to my job. So maybe this is a better question to ask.
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of brings up the question, right, as to developers have the voice of DevOps behind them, right? Which is like, hey, how do we scale this and everything? But QA doesn't necessarily have that, and that's where I think QA Meta is actually cornered the market in your product called TestOps, right? And I think that's actually a role that should exist. You guys called it a product, but I see it more as a role that should exist. And is how do we scale test, right? And how do we actually scale reporting for you guys? Or how do we run, 10,000 tests? Or like I was just reading that Google runs 4 billion tests, right, around a day. And they still have manual testers, right, and all that. And like you look at a company with unlimited resources, and they still haven't pulled the trigger on getting rid of manual testers. However, their manual testers are like really high quality manual testers. Like they know the insides and out of whatever product they're testing at. And I think there's value for basically every facet of testing, mostly because at the end of the day, your cash is king, and the customer, if they sort of take their money away, is like you're sort of screwed at that point.
Yes. So speaking of the product or the process or a role, so there is actually like two ways of looking at what TestOps is, because we actually call the Allure TestOps, the platform itself, as TestOps just because we didn't come up with a better naming. But the whole idea was that, like, as you know, DevOps is not a person, is not an engineer, and that's more of a culture and processes and tooling. And then TestOps is the same. We just build the tool which fits the TestOps process so well that we just call it this way. And within the QA Meta team, when somebody asks us what TestOps is, I tend to think that it is a process backed up with expertise or tooling. And when somebody, like, I did a couple of talks about what TestOps is, like TestOps 101 or interviews, and some people just say like, okay, we've got everything you've been describing in our teams without using Allure TestOps. And on my side, I just say, okay, that's great. That means you've got TestOps, not a platform, just a process. And that's amazing. If you get this skilled team, which was able to build all this process and then find the right tooling or create and build the right tooling, well, good for you. So that's how it works. And yes, so thank you for noting. And yes, we do look at TestOps as a role or a process more than just a tooling.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is something that I've sort of talked with a few of my previous employers and my current employer as to like, we sort of need to get out of this mindset of QA as like the last thing, right? But it should be built into the entire process, similar to how DevOps is built into the culture, right? Testing first should also be built into the culture. And it's been good, in my opinion, because one of the biggest issues that I've had in the past is we're running all these tests, right? At my previous company specifically, we were running 500, 600 tests each run, and we were releasing 10 times a day, right? So the issue became, we don't have the capacity to run tests more than this. So what do we do? So that's where me as like the QA automation person sort of stepped up into the DevOps world and found out, that's how I found out about Allure, which is, hey, this cool thing can actually like report, and we no longer need to sort of worry about our own custom reporting or like the Jenkins end unit reporting. And then after that, it was, well, now that we're in full CI/CD, how do we actually host all these report results, right? And I ended up going down the path of trying to set up Allure in a Docker and all that. And then I was just sort of looking around. I can't exactly remember where I found it. I'm pretty sure it was on GitHub somewhere, where somebody made a mention to TestOps, right? And that sort of solved the issue right there as to like, hey, I don't got to use Docker anymore. I can just point all my test runs to the server. And, as different jobs come in, they'll just sort of start listening and reports will start getting built in. And they're all sort of in a centralized dashboard, because if I kept going down the Docker way where everything was its own little Docker instance, we would have, 10, 20 URLs a day as to like, hey, here's the report for this, here's the report for that, versus TestOps just sort of centralized it. But to get to that point, as to like going from something homegrown to just point at it, that in my opinion is like magic, right? And yeah.
Yeah, so we actually started discussing the next question about and challenges that you faced and with test automation. And you just described the classical route of people coming from Allure report to TestOps, because once you want the real scale, the amount of testing, you actually try to find a way to, and going for containers with Allure report is like the classic route. And to be honest, there is a third-party open source tool which actually Dockerizes the Allure reports. And we used to recommend it a couple of years ago when Allure TestOps was young and green. But now of course, we do recommend TestOps just because it has so long growth done already. But so did it actually solve the problem? Because I've heard a lot of people saying that reports are not necessary at all, because like our developers can take a look at the Slack reports from CI/CD system or something. So what's this, like, what is the moment when you need actually this fancy reporting? When does it happen?
Yeah. So for our teams and for like the developers I worked, they tend not to look in the reports until something goes red, right? That's usually the issue. And I mean, the sort of magic that comes with it is that with like Allure, you can attach any kind of item right into it, any kind of artifact, whether it's a screenshot, a video, or a zip file, a har file, anything to it, right? And that has proven really useful, especially when paired with something like Playwright, right? Where it just has native built-in network tracing, and it has native built-in video and all that. And when something fails, the developer can just sort of like open the report and look at what went wrong and look at the video. Usually at that point, they don't even have to ask QA like what went wrong, right? And this is one of the really good things about just this type of reporting, is that it becomes really self-servant, right? You no longer need to sort of waste time in like communicating what went wrong when all the information is just in a centralized place. So I think that was, okay. I think that was the moment that like I noticed that it actually solved an issue, right? A real issue, which is trying to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah, okay. So by the way, speaking of reporting for automation, do you have manual testers in your team?
Not in this team. At my previous company, we had manual testers. Yeah, in this team, it's a really small company. I'm their like 58th employee, so we're not at the place where we think we need manual testers right now. Yeah.
Okay, so and you have also mentioned that your main task is taking small companies from the startup phase to full speed. So could you just describe a little bit more in details what do you actually do? So I believe that's some kind of bringing up pipeline, so building some automation, but maybe some more details, or depending on your last company or previous one.
Yeah. So I sort of started this by accident, right? That I sort of got this experience. Like I said, I sort of aimed for QA from the start. I was lucky enough to be recruited into Code 42, which used to do Crash Plan. They were relatively young. I sort of saw the growth of that company, and at that point, I was sort of like an individual contributor. just, committing tests and sort of like just seeing what my managers did and all that. And then shortly after, I sort of got tired of commuting. So I searched a work from home job, found it. It was also a startup. They had no automation or anything. And I sort of came in, I sort of got automation off the ground. I was the first one to sort of like connect the pipelines from the developers build artifacts to automation after deployed automatically, return to Slack and all that, and set up a really solid framework. And then after that, the QA team just grew like naturally, and they were able to hop into the framework and just sort of write tests. And that's what sort of took it from startup mode where we were releasing, every other week in a normal sprint cadence to starting to release 2-3 times a day, then 10 times a day. I think the record that I last heard a few months ago was like 20 something times a day. So that's like 1 an hour, right? That they're releasing. And I've been able to sort of leverage that experience to land this career here at Sterling, whereas like they're also at startup, they're also at like the 2-week cadence, and it's like, how do we go to that next level? How do we actually split up the monolith and start writing tests specifically, not just like for the monolith, but specifically for this tiny application that we're writing that will eventually be part of the monolith. So it's sort of important to know how to write end-to-end tests, as well as just how to test that one little stack of the application on its own. So that's what really allows you to go from small startups to scale.
Yeah, okay, sounds great. Because I just wanted to like take another angle at the same things you've just told, because I've been talking to a lot of companies like who actually tried TestOps or who were looking for DevOps pace in testing. And usually the difference between a company who doesn't understand what TestOps as a process is and a company that actually implements it is the difference in questions they actually ask their QA. So the usual question for people who are not really ready to upgrade the process sounds like, how long does it take for us to run all the tests, for example? And then the answer is like 5 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, or 2 days, maybe, if there is a lot of manual testing and the product is large. So, and when you switch the question from how long does it take to what part of our test suite or the full suite you can run in like 30 minutes, that creates this like conflict of interests for a person who is answering like, okay, so we actually can't test everything in half an hour. So, and then the second question comes up, like, what do we need to do it like this? So the right questions are the key for the right processes, as far as I believe, and as far as my management experience says. So what are the other questions maybe you could advise for people to think about for QA?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think a good question to always like ask yourself and ask your team is right at the end of the day, in my opinion, how long tests take, it doesn't really matter if you're releasing in like multiple times a day. But a really good question is how do we measure KPIs, right? That's always a big one, is how do we measure bugs coming in and all that. That's always a good one, because there's always going to be bugs out there. Like there's always going to be some edge case or something like that, right? And I think the biggest one people can ask is, can we confidently test this part of the application on its own, right? And that's sort of like a culture thing as well, right? Is the trust in the engineering team and the QA team that we can actually slice this framework, whatever we're creating, can we slice it enough that it won't affect anything else? I think those are like the valid questions to start asking, right? Have we sliced it correctly? And as soon as you sort of get into that mentality that quality starts at the beginning, right, and it's not something as an afterthought, I think those are the right questions to ask.
Yeah, so that makes sense. At least to me. So raise your hand if you're listening to us and you agree with us, and if you don't, just jump in to say something to us. I believe that would be at least like we'll have fun. And I believe that we can just a little like just to continue our conversation, I will ask what are your further plans with testing in your team? Just because as far as I understand, you are like now in the process of adoption the TestOps in a new team. And actually, another question was, how did it go, like adopting Allure TestOps? Because I know some people are really struggling because it's a large platform, and if you don't have Allure reporting, for example, you have to provide some kind of annotations in your code base. Some people create parsers. Some people like just spend months working with the code base. So just tell us about your plans and your experience with TestOps.
Definitely. So at my previous company, it was pretty easy to adopt it, mostly because we didn't have a test case manager when we initially started looking for something. We were also using Allure from the start. It's
sense.
something that, so it was like, hey, this is sort of the easy path. Our stuff will sort of migrate. So that's how TestOps was adopted there. Here, it's a little bit of a different state. We're currently using TestRails as our test case manager, but I really been pushing for TestOps as to like, hey, its price is comparable, and then we'll get all the trending and stuff, and then we'll get automated tests as test cases as well. So that's been a little bit of an easy sell. Right now we're like in vendor assessment because we have we're out of SOC 2, so we can't necessarily just say, okay, looks good. So it's on the vendor assessment team to go and say these guys are legit, they look good. So that's sort of the dynamic that I've had, the two dynamics of adopting TestOps. As to like any opposition, I really haven't found it. I think as soon as you show it to a QA team and they all give the thumbs up, like if you actually show the power of it, they all give the thumbs up and they're like, yeah, let's go with this. And I think that's just sort of what more QA teams need, right? They just need the exposure to it. I know I've talked to a lot of QA folks and they haven't even heard of like Allure or something like that, right? And they're still using like just JUnit reports or NUnit reports. So I think as soon as they see it, they sort of like, it looks nice, right? That's why it's called Allure. It looks nice.
To be honest, there is a story about why it's called Allure, actually, because Allure is also the stepping of a horse. So
got it. Yeah.
And that's steps, and then the way steps go in a row. So that's also Allure, and it's also the shine of Allure. So yeah, naming was
nice. Yeah. I had no idea. Good. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. And yeah, for next plans, right? So here at SureLink, we're just starting up, right? We have like 100 tests or so running. We're still sort of wondering if they can be parallelized. I think that's more of a limitation of the platform more than like Allure or anything else. So we're sort of in the talks about that. And right now we're covering API and UI with Playwright. After that, it'll be load testing, which I'm sort of interested to see what kind of reports I can generate with Artillery to sort of also try to push into TestOps and see what it gives us back. Some of the other things we've been talking about is synthetic clicking, which is monitoring as code. So we've been looking into Checkly as well. And we're looking as to, hey, how can we integrate Checkly that'll run all these tests, every minute or every second or every 5 seconds. For example, login or sending out emails, right, through Playwright. And how do we actually send those reports over to TestOps? So we've been looking into that. So those are sort of the plans, right? Not just monitoring as code with like APM, but actually from like the end user experience as to what happens if I, try to check out or use a coupon or something like that, the full experience. So those are the plans. Is try to modernize the small startup.
Yeah, so that sounds like actually continuous testing in production, but without like affecting usual customers. Speaking of load testing, as far as I understand, we've got actually a couple of months ago a new load testing engineer started focusing on building load testing in TestOps. So I believe that in a couple of releases, a bunch of new functionality connected with load testing will show up. And then we'll also think of performance testing, I believe, in some perspective, but that's nowhere in roadmap by now. But that's kind of insight I can give you. So we are going to build some kind of load testing framework for TestOps, because load testing is a bit different from end-to-end testing or unit testing in terms of like the results you get and the results you want to be shown. So you will need more widgets to be customizable and so on. So yes, we are doing this too. So just stay tuned and update as often as you can, as frequently as you can. Or
Exactly right.
If you're using cloud, you can just wait until we update you, because we are doing that for our cloud users.
Nice. Exactly right. And that's sort of something that at my previous company, like the engineering team loved, right? Is that they saw the QA team using Allure and TestOps, and they really liked the reports. And the engineering manager approached me and he said, "Can we use this for unit testing?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And they had their own little dashboard of Allure with every time all the unit tests run, they would just sort of send them over to Allure, and they also got trending and everything. And that actually helped us discover that we had a lot of time issues. So every time where daylight saving hours would happen, we would just see a bunch of retries climb, right? And then like the next day they would go back down, or a bunch of failures climb and go down. So just like that was enough for them to figure out like, hey, there's something wrong with on those days when these tests run, or when these integration tests run. So that was pretty amazing. And I haven't looked at Allure in a couple of months, so maybe is there something I wish was there? It was a calendar, right? A little calendar that I can go back and say, all right, how did my test run like December 12th or something like that? And maybe there is a way, and maybe I just don't know, but that's something I really wish that was there. Yeah.
I do believe that there is a way to build a custom widget with AQL actually, which would be showing you at least the trend in terms of days or months or weeks, so you can slice it in different ways. Mm-hmm. I cannot provide you the exact query, but if you just ask our support team, I believe they will help you to choose the right widget type and then the right query to build this widget, because we actually put a lot of effort in building Allure query language for dashboards, mm-hmm. right? For the exact reason you are saying, because we try to create as many widgets as possible, but you never know what people might need. And usually when people say, for example, as you said, like, we want a calendar, and we're like, we don't have a calendar in our widgets, but what kind of task you are trying to solve now? Then you say, when people say, for example, I want to see the trends, or history, or how everything changed in time, that actually much better feedback and input for us to build some solution, because we know how it works under the hood, and there is also a workaround or something. But if there is no ready capability or functionality, we can just put it in some sprints further and then just bring it to you. Yeah. So thank you for the feedback. Actually, that makes sense. And
and it's an amazing tool, right? Like something that really allowed me to sell TestOps to my current CEO is we have test rails, right? Which so far it's only being updated manually, so you have to go in there and update the test cases manually. I sort of sold it as, hey, you can sort of kill two birds with one stone. You can write automation with Playwright and test steps, and then Allure will just absorb them, and there's your test cases, right? And then since we're SOC 2 compliant, we have to give all our test cases for audit. And last year we got dinged for not having enough test cases. So this year we're sort of aiming to build up a bunch of automated tests and run them and give that as, hey, here's all the tests that we run. And like having Allure, the CEO, as soon as I showed him that, he was sold all over it, because last year he got a little bit dinged, so this time he doesn't want to get the same ding. So that was a big one, that you can sort of kill two birds with one stone. It doesn't just only function as a reporting tool, but you can use it as a test and as an automated test case manager as well.
Yeah, so that's why it was actually built, because actually solves a bunch of problems like code generation for tests based on manual test cases, for example. So it's, well, that's just code generation, it won't solve all your problems, but still, as far as ChatGPT has an API, so we are thinking about building in some intelligent functions like providing some advanced code generation, for example, and so on. So, and speaking of that, when you just said that when someone comes to you and says like, can you put our unit tests written in Java or C# or no matter on which technology actually, and then you just say, yes, Allure TestOps can do that. That's actually what I believe is really important in modern software, like creation and building, because we are building Allure TestOps as a like technology agnostic tool. So we don't force, we never force anyone to use the specific tooling. We don't try to vendor lock any functionality. So if the framework supports or a CI/CD supports some kind of functionality, we will try to support it within Allure TestOps. So, and that's why I do love that you actually mentioned Playwright and going for modern tools in testing, because Playwright is so well designed under the hood and provides so many information that when we build the Playwright plugin or adapter, we were, wow, so you don't have to provide any added annotations, so you just hook all the data from the code itself and from the Playwright runner, which works great. And it was so, we were actually really happy because the first reporting the team of Playwright actually did was Allure report, and we were, wow, great news. So we don't even have to write our own adapter, so we just support it here. And yeah, so I believe that's really important to not force people to switch their technology they are already using. So if you're using Jenkins or GitHub Actions or GitLab or something, just plug it in and let it work, because that's the same as like computer hardware works. So nobody wants custom ports for GPUs. So we all use PCI Express, and that just works. You just take any graphics card and it works. So why don't people do, I mean, like, why not everyone in software building does the same. So they try to bring their own custom proprietary stuff. And yeah, so we need more standardization. So sorry for bragging, but I believe we need more standardization.
No, it's good that you brag, right? Because that sort of reminds me of what we talked a little bit, which is that when I started back at FMG using Allure, it was on Jenkins, right? And it was just calling the plugin that you guys wrote for Jenkins, and it was that easy, right? And through Groovy pipelines, you're actually forced to write the little CLI out and everything. But all I had to do when we moved to GitHub Actions, is just copy and paste that little CLI to GitHub Actions, and it just worked, right? And now that I'm operating out of a GitLab, it's the exact same thing, right? It's literally the exact same command through the CLI. It's just the Allure CLT package or whatever it's called. The only thing that changes is the server endpoint basically now, because I'm at a different company, but is the exact same, completely different technology. One going from Selenium C# and /Playwright to one going from TypeScript, Playwright only. And it just sort of worked. And not just that, right? But the fact that like Playwright has it built in out of the box, and it's like the top one that they recommend, the third-party providers. And I was just looking at OSS Insights, and Playwright is now like officially the most popular end-to-end testing tool next to Puppeteer, right? Puppeteer has like 87,000 stars. Playwright is the second one that's up and coming. It's bypassed Selenium with stars and all that. So it is sort of this new modern wave that's coming in of testing. And I think there's a lot of good things in the horizon, right? And with you guys building in some type of AI in there with Playwright doing some of its code generation, and that there's a lot of opportunity to grow within QA. And you can go in as deep as you want, which is sort of what I said at the start. It's still code at the end of the day. And it's a craft, right? In my opinion, it's a craft, and you guys done a great job at
thank you.
at sort of representing that craft.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually, thank you for warm words, and I'm not really good at accepting compliments, so thank you. And speaking of great tools, like, okay, we've discussed a little TestOps and Playwright. Are there any UI, API, or testing or UX testing stuff you could recommend to our listeners and to people who will watch us on YouTube?
Yeah, definitely. So I really like Checkly, which is a synthetic clicker. I think that is sort of the next way to go to if you're sort of struggling to scale test and to scale functionality and have like a rolling tests going out there. I think you might want to look into Checkly real close. You can use your native code base if it's out of Playwright. And yeah, the other one that I know a lot of people struggle with is end-to-end testing with emails. At least that's one of the things that I've always struggled with. Recently, I've been using developer mail or Gorilla Mail as like the open sort of free. But there's also like Mailosaur and MailSlurp that are paid options for actual inboxes. And they have built-in APIs and all that. So those are some really good ones to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I believe that we've got a couple of minutes for questions of people. So anyone, have you got any questions? So if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
I have one question. What about your vision? When will be the time when the code and the testing will be done by the artificial intelligence and the human will be maybe fired and maybe go to the vacation and see how the artificial intelligence works?
Yeah, so when it'll happen, I have no idea, right? And I don't think it'll happen, right? Not in our lifetimes. I don't think it'll happen in our lifetimes, right? But at the end of the day, right, it's similar to like what happened throughout industrialization, right? There was that like migration that happened from rural to city, right? But there was all these jobs inside the city, right? And for better or for worse, most people nowadays in the modern world are better off. We have running water, we have heating and all that. There's like the whole other side of like fulfillment and all that, but I'm not going to get into that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I will just take a word also. I've been talking to an AI expert recently, and there is some kind of weird logic which I could have never think about, is that AI specialists, they don't actually think in terms of like performance or amounts of data. So the last time I've been talking to an AI expert, he said, so the main goal of AI today is to save energy. So because we've got all the data in the internet of the last several years processed by GPT-3 model, and that's fine. But now it takes a lot of time, like computing time. I mean, like it takes power, and the only thing which actually holds the AI back is the energy and power. So I believe that we will be stepping the next so we should wait for the next either for the next generation of models to come up, which is unlikely in a couple of years, because I believe GPT-3 is quite modern piece of software and there is no like large researches to pump it up more, or when we find some kind of source of free energy to put all the GPUs in the world to make this huge AI think better than a person. And again, we're still struggling to make this AI understanding something and not just doing extremely complicated instructions after being educated on a huge data set. So I believe that so I believe we should wait for two things, like huge amount of energy and then for a new model of education for AI, which we don't know what kind of this model should be. So we're pretty secured now.
Yeah, and I think it's all back to like what part in the curve we are, right? And it's sort of impossible to tell right now as to where we are. I do see it as a, you know, we've all heard of like the 10x developer, right? They're 10 times as productive. I think if you use these tools accordingly, you can all be 10x developers, right? Because you can sort of tell it like, hey, can you write a unit test case in this example using this library? And it'll show you a little example, right? So instead of going out to Stack Overflow and trying to hunt it down, you have like a senior dev there with all the knowledge in the world that can sort of like help you build something. So
yeah, but still you have to watch pretty closely to what actually the AI provides to you, because I found out that it actually translates quite well. So if you want to translate something from some language to English or vice versa, it does the job well. And then I tried to put a couple of paragraphs of fiction book into translation, and then I found out that it actually changed the plot.
Nice.
So I was like, okay, so I think the plot is not good enough.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of effort to find the issue, because you're reading the translated version, you're like, okay, that's written well in English, but I don't actually remember this part in Russian, like in Russian part or in Spanish part or in German. And then I'm starting to reread each part several times, and then I found out that, okay, so it just created a piece of text, a new plot, which makes total sense, but it's not the task I asked it to do. So AI is a tricky thing. So
it is. It's just like Google, right, with their Bard, and it completely failed on stage, and they lost a bunch of money on the stocks that day. So it's somewhat there, but not really. So
thank you a lot for coming. That was actually it was really interesting for me. The discussion was great. I hope you enjoyed it too.
Definitely, yeah.
And I hope our listeners enjoyed the